Would you like to control your animatronics from a phone or iPad, or even through your live stream chat? Then I've created the program that'll do just that and using this pretty cheap board. So program's free to you if you want to download it. So let's get to how to make this happen. This is going to be a long video, but don't be intimidated by it. The basics of it are fairly simple, and I just go into a lot of extra detail that you may not even need in it. So basically what we're looking at is you want to be able to get to see this interface on your phone or tablet. The multi-prop web controller here. How we're going to do that is by using this ESP32 board. The basic steps are you need to get the drivers onto Windows so you can connect this via USB. You need to download the Arduino software to be able to upload the code that I've provided onto your chip here. Once you do that, you add your SSID, your Wi-Fi name and password, and your chosen IP address into the code and upload it to the chip. And you type in the IP address to your phone that you put into the board here, and you'll be good to go. I have even provided ways to set it up to where you don't even have to solder. Or I've provided directions if you want to get more advanced with it, or even dig into the code yourself. Let's get to the first step. Follow along with the video and with the directions and the who's what's it down below. And there's even links to the products you'll need on Amazon. The first program we want to install is called Arduino IDE. This will be the interface that you use to upload the code to your ESP32 chip. So if you go to Arduino, just search Arduino IDE and download the one for your computer. I chose the Windows 10. So here we have the Arduino IDE. Right now there's code in it, but it'll probably be blank for you when you open it. So the first thing we need to do in here is we need to download the settings for the chip and board that you're using. So to do that, we will go to File and Preferences. And right here where it says Additional Boards Manager, since Arduino IDE doesn't come default with the software needed to run the board, we have to input the URL where it can download the files it needs. So I've provided that for you here. Copy and paste the link in here to the GitHub for the Espressif Arduino ESP32 and click OK. Now we have to apply what we downloaded to the Arduino software. So we'll go to Tools and Board to the Board Manager. And we'll need to search for what we just downloaded. It was for an ESP32. And the one you're looking for is Espressif Systems. So we click here. The install button isn't here for me because I've already installed it, but you will install this. Now what we just did installed a whole bunch of different boards. So now we have to tell Arduino which board we're actually using. So we'll go to Tools, and we'll go to Boards, and you'll go down to the Do It DevKit V1. So you might have to search around for a bit. It installed a bunch of boards here, and here it is, the Do It ESP32 DevKit version 1. And you'll actually see the dev kit printed on the back of the board that you ordered if you ordered the same one I did. Now this software doesn't come default with the web server ability, so we'll need to grab that and apply it to the Arduino IDE. So I've provided you the link. Let me snag that. I've provided you the link straight to the GitHub. And GitHub's safe to download from, don't have to worry about that. to the ESPA sync web server.zip. And it'll ask you to save it to a file. It doesn't really matter where you save it, just somewhere that you can find it easily. So to get this applied, the nice thing is you don't even have to unzip it. You can go to Sketch and then include library and then add a zip library. And you will search for what you downloaded. Here you can see I have my ESPA Sync Web Server Master. I'll open that and apply it. And that will unlock the ability to be able to log into this device through an IP address. Next, you will need to download the software, the drivers, to be able to connect your board to Windows, so Arduino IDE can see it. So I have provided you the link to Scylla Labs. What you'll be looking for is a CP210X Universal Windows Driver. Now this one, it'll download as a zip file. And once it's downloaded, you will need to install this one. So we have to unzip it. Use your unzipper of choice. If it's extract through Windows, Windows should be able to do it, or you can download WinZip or whatever you like to use. Now go into the file that you've unzipped, and you have a .inf file in here, slab VCP. You'll right click it and click install. An alternate way of doing this would be to go into your device manager and search for a USB drive or USB device that has maybe an exclamation point by it, and you'll right click it and you'll install the drivers that way, and you'll have to surf to where you've downloaded these. But to me, it's easier just to right click this, install it, it automatically installs it into the right area, and then the little exclamation point problem in Device Manager will go away. Once Arduino IDE knows that it's a ESP32 DevKit v1, we'll need to tell the program what COM port to connect to the chip over the USB. You'll come down here to port, and for me it was COM3. I guess it should be the same for you, but just make sure you've got a COM port here. And then once you're connected, down here in the bottom right of the software, right now I don't have mine connected. You can see it's not connected. But once it's connected, it'll appear here and everything will look good. Next, you will go to my GitHub page. I'm Casual Hunter, and it's my ESP32 prop controller. And you'll see a multi-prop controller. At the time of filming this, it's in version 1. The text file for it. So you'll grab all this information here, all the code all the way to the bottom, copy it, go back into the Arduino IDE and paste it. You can see that I've pasted it here. Okay, now before you upload this software to your chip, into the dev board, there's a couple of things that you absolutely have to change. Right here as your Wi-Fi credentials, you'll manually type in your Wi-Fi SSID, the name of it, and your password. Then next, you'll need to type in your IP address manually. Now the way this one's set up is you need a static IP. Now all of your routers come default dynamic. So let's say you have the most common IP scheme for a router is 192.168.1, and the gateway 192.168.1.1. Now the trick is the last octet here, the last of the 4 numbers is called an octet. So the last octet here. Now this normally for this IP scheme, it will range from since 1 is the gateway, 192.168.1.1 is the gateway, and the highest number is .255, but that's unusable. So any number between there should work, but I would suggest picking a higher number. So I would suggest 251. And a little bit later, I'll show you how to get into your router and change a particular range of IPs to be statics. So it may not make sense right now, but this may work fine. But if for some reason, without having to make any changes in your router, but if for some reason there's an IP conflict, because maybe your router issued out this IP to your cell phone, then both devices are trying to use the same IP address and both of them refuse to work. So I'll show you how to avoid that. So now that you've got your SSID, your password, and the IP address that you're going to use, input here. There's other things that you can change, but it's not pertinent or not imperative. You'll upload this software. So in the top left, you'll see an upload, and it'll upload the software to your chipset. Okay, now let's talk about how to set a static IP and how to set a static IP range in your router. So your router by default will probably come as 192.168.1.1 for your gateway. For me, I'm using 10.1.10.1. You can see here, that's my gateway. The IP range, this is the dynamic range of IP addresses that will be handed out automatically by the router whenever a device connects, a new device connects to your router that doesn't have an IP address. So for me, I have mine purposely set to 100 to 254. So the only addresses that my router will hand out is 10.1.10.100 through 254. That means everything from the beginning of the gateway here, everything between .1, 10.1.10.1, and 10.1.10.100 will not be assigned by the router. Though that means by default, they're accessible for static IPs for anything that you want to set on your network. So I set my devices to 10.1 to 10.80 because it falls between the 1 and the 100, and 10.1.10.81, 10.1 to 10.82. Now your router may be different. So see, I can go down here to the DHCP area here, and there's where I set my range. I could change this. It came by default between 1 and 2, or 2, because 1 is already the router, but 2 to 254. But I decided to, no, I want to take away some of the dynamic and have .2 through .99 inaccessible to the DHCP to automatically give out to anything else. Because if you set an IP address, let's see, I were to set my IP address to my device to maybe 110, so 10.1.10.110, sure as the world, someone may hook up a phone or something, and the DHCP won't know that I've set a static IP on this other device of that, and it'll just hand it out to the next phone that connects to my network. And then the dev kit board and the phone are both trying to use the IP address at the same time. The router goes crazy and just doesn't serve either of them. So you definitely really need to have a static IP range, or you need to have a DHCP range and adjust it just a little bit to leave you some static IPs. So I have, like I said, I have .2 through .99 available to me. For you, you may end up doing 192.168.1.251 to 254. That gives you 251, 252, 253, 254. That gives you 4 static IPs that you can use that's safe to use on your network. If everything worked correctly, then you can take that static IP that you applied to your board. For me, it was 10.1.10.82, and bam, I'll connect it over the Wi-Fi, and you can see the buttons here ready. Now, whatever I have hooked up to these buttons, when I click it, it will trigger it on the device and then trigger my prop. If I want to change these, I can go back into the software, and right here where it says button names on web interface, this is where you can customize things. You can, right here in the between the quotation marks, I can change D4 to maybe jumping spider. Maybe RX2 will be fog machine, and you can name them whatever you like here. And naming them will not affect the program at all in any way, other than we'll change the label on these buttons. And that is completely optional. You don't have to do that. So a quick overview of what these buttons do. All of these buttons except for RX and R2 are standard, will mimic the action of a step pad. So each one of these will be hooked up to a wire from the board to a prop, and they will trigger a step pad. Now RX2 and, well, it says RX2. It should be a TX2 here. I accidentally have this mislabeled, but I can easily change the label back to TX2. What you'll see is RX2 and TX2. These are programmed to have a little bit longer of a connection to a relay, and it will trigger a fog machine for about 3 seconds to keep the fog coming out. So RX2 and TX2 are reserved basically for fog machine if you want to use it, but that still leaves you plenty of buttons for animatronics. Okay, so let's go over the most simple setup here. Now everything I have listed, it is available through Amazon, and I've provided affiliate links. Now if you use the affiliate links, it doesn't cost you any extra, and a small percentage of whatever you buy, Amazon will reimburse me. So I'd appreciate it, since I'm providing you all the software for free. This is just because I love Halloween so much. And I'm not asking for any money, but if you're going to buy it, I might as well get a small cut of it. So I'd appreciate it if you use those links. So let's take a look at this setup. This is what I call the no solder setup. If you're not into programming or not into soldering, this should be readily accessible to almost anybody. So once you purchase the chip and the board, this is the terminal board, you just put the chip, the pins of the chip onto the board itself, and the terminals, the left and right here, are little screws, little flathead screwdriver, and you will take these mono 3.5 millimeter jacks, and you will put the red one into, and you can choose, I have the list of all the terminals that will work. The black one will always go to the ground in the bottom here, and the red one, D33 will work, D32 will work. It all depends on what button you want to press. So I have it hooked up to D32, and on the other side I have the ground, because there's a ground on either side of the board, and in this case I use D4. Now the plugs that you'll use will be a 3.5 millimeter mono jack. Make sure it's mono. The mono has a tip and a sleeve, and I'll show you later what a stereo one looks like. It looks a lot different, but you can order these. Like I said, I've got the full cable provided. You don't have to do any soldering to make your own cable. I've made my own, but as long as you only need about 12 foot of length, there you go. Now if you do want to, you can also do a step pad pass through. D19 is set up as a step pad. The only problem you run into is that there's only so much space to put ground wires in this terminal. The best practice is just to have one wire per terminal. So if you're just using one prop and you want to be able to trigger it with your phone, and you want to have a step pad out, totally not necessary, but you can hook up this one to D19. That is a step pad input, and you can hook this output one to D21. and that will make it where you have to put 2 black lines into the ground. Just twist them together, stick them into the ground, and then 19 will only ever trigger port 21, D21. So I don't know many people that will ever do that, but you know, it's an available option. Ahead of time, I programmed it, and so people can still step on the step pad if you're not watching, and it will trigger the animatronic, or you can trigger it yourself. So yeah, and of course the USB to power it. It's a standard micro USB. You have to make sure you have enough amperage. I had an older Plantronics. It's a small amperage device, and I would get a red light, but it would not connect to Wi-Fi. So make sure you get a good. I don't know the exact amperage you need, but if for some reason it's not working right, you probably don't have enough power going to the board. But other than that, that's a no solder, easy setup. The hardest part by far was getting all the software, getting the code onto the board. This part itself, pretty straightforward. And it can easily do 2 props. Now, if you want to try to shove more wires into the ground port here, you could probably squeeze out 4 props out of this pretty easily. Yeah, without any kind of soldering. Now let's get into a more advanced setup. Here I have the board placed into a breadboard. Now the breadboard is just for testing purposes. What you will end up doing is soldering this down to an actual PCB board, but I'll show you that. So the goal of this one is to solder everything down, put it into an enclosure, and have jacks where you can put multiple props hooked up to it. And also I have a setup here to where you can use the actual Spirit Halloween power cord to power the board and the animatronic. So you place the board. One problem with the standard size PCB board is that this chipset or this development board is too wide. As you can see on the right hand side of the board, we only have space right here for 1 hole, and there's no holes on the left hand side. So what that leaves you having to do is, if you want to use any of the pins on the left hand side, is you need to solder those wires onto the board first before you place the development board and chip onto the PCB board. And I have a little video, I can have that rolling here, of me putting down the wire first, soldering it down, and then putting the chip onto the board and soldering that into place. So the way a breadboard and PCB boards like this work is everything in a horizontal line here are connected, electrically connected. And on the other side it's the same thing. Now on the outsides of the board, the positive and negative, these are vertically connected. All these holes are linked. Now we'll take the pigtail, the barrel connector for the power. This is different than the 3.5 millimeter jack. This is a different cable completely. We'll solder that onto the board, and then the wire here will go up and connect to pin 15, which is VN. That's the voltage input. Now the board wants 5 volts. The power adapter is a 6 volt, but there's a little chip on here, a little device on here that will even out the voltage, and it will only take in 5 volts into the board, so it is completely safe. That it can protect your board for up to a 12 volt input, so you don't have to worry about your board. And you'll see here that I no longer need USB to power this board. So now we also have to get the power out to the animatronic. So since these are all linked, I can put the red one here and the black one here, and then plug that into the animatronic. So the power comes in here, splits to the board to the voltage input, and then splits to here. Now you also have to ground the board, so we will need to make a link here to the ground, And since everything here is vertically connected, right here where the ground pin is in the 14th pin down, I'll connect this pin, since these two pins are linked through the board. I'll run a black wire to here, and now the board is grounded to the same ground as the power adapter. Then we need to add our jacks. Now this can be up to, 12, 13 of these mono jacks. So we have, let's say we'll use pin D4. The positive will go to this terminal here, and then the black was the ground to the sleeve of the connector. So you got the tip and the sleeve. The sleeve is always the ground. So the ground here is the same common ground as the power adapter, same common ground as the board, and same common ground for the sleeve of your mono jack. And then the positive will go right here. Some of these, it may be the other one, but you can actually look on the inside and see where the actual tip of your connector touches the metal on the inside, and choose that pin. So now the tip goes to the red, the sleeve goes to the ground, common ground that everything else is using. And once it's all soldered down, you click the button and trigger it, and I have mine set up to where I have 4 of them. I have one of them, so you can see I'm using 4 of them. Now with the enclosure, I'll drill holes into to the bottom. Just in case it's out in the weather, you want all the cables coming in through the bottom, all the connectors in the bottom. Makes it a whole lot more weatherproof. The actual enclosure itself is weatherproof as well. The power will go into it, and then there's a little nut on the 3.5 millimeter female jacks. You'll take that nut off, stick it through the hole from the inside, and then put the nut and cinch it down, and be able to connect your step pads here, or the wires going to the step pad of your animatronic. Now you don't have to use the 6-volt adapter. You could also power it through the USB just as well, and then you wouldn't need to do all the soldering at the bottom of this to get the power passed through. All depends on what you want and what you would like to do with it. I'm not using this particular setup because I have my chip in my garage, and I'm running really long mono jack wires out of my garage to each of my props. I've run about 100 foot of 24 gauge. 24 gauge is special because it's the same gauge as used in Ethernet wiring. So if you have Ethernet, long lengths of Ethernet cord laying around, you can just use, now there's 4 pairs of wires in every Ethernet cord. You can choose whichever one. If you want to use the blues, the orange, the greens, the browns, and use the browns or whatever, and connect them to, and solder. Instead of putting Ethernet jacks on the ends, you would solder on the 3.5 millimeter mono jack. And like I said, I tested it over about 100 feet worth of 24 gauge, and it still triggered my prop just fine, which surprised me. I thought I was going to have to use a 14 gauge, 18 gauge wire to go that length, but worked fine with that. So that really opens up what kind of wire you can use as long as you have some soldering abilities. So now let's talk using a relay. So in summation, what is a relay? It is basically an interface, or a physical interface, that you use to have a DC voltage device like this development board be able to trigger an AC high voltage switch. So if you were to hook up wires, high voltage wires, like say to the switch of a fog machine to activate the fog machine, straight to the board, you just blow it, because you can't put 110 volts AC onto a 5-volt DC board. So this switch, this relay, is a physical, like an air gap between the DC and the AC voltage. The way that it works is, instead of 2 wires like the mono jacks use, you need 3 wires to make a relay work. Right here we have the 3-volt. There's one in the pin 15 on the bottom right hand side is a 3 volts. and it plugs up with the red line here to the positive terminal. And then we use the black ground to the DC minus for the negative or the ground terminal. And then the in terminal here for the blue line, this is your signal to trigger your relay. I have the board program for RX2 or TX2 to trigger the relay. The difference in these two pins is that it is programmed to send a constant signal for about 2.5 to 3 seconds to the relay to hold the relay open. The other pins is just a really quick momentary switch, but this one, it holds it open for a while. And with the relay, the big blue box, there's an actual physical switch in there that switches back and forth depending on the signal that it receives from the board. So let's take a look in the top left. This is the opposite side. This is where the high voltage goes. NO means normally open. COM means common ground. And NC means normally closed. So in the bottom left-hand side here, you'll see, when you flip it over, you'll see an actual schematic printed onto the board of how the switch works. You can see the white line here. The center is your common ground. And you can see the switch is tilted right over here and touch and making contact here. So it is permanently making contact. The switch is permanently making contact to the NC, normally closed. Whenever the relay receives a signal, you'll hear it. It actually is a physical switch inside this blue box that flips over and makes contact to the other side, to the normally open. So while the signal is being sent to the relay, you'll hear it click, and it'll switch from the normal closed to the normal open. And for about 2.5 to 3 seconds, when it's hooked up to a fog machine switch, you'll get some fog out of it. I can't think of many other high voltage uses in haunting, at least not that I use. Well, I guess you could do lighting, but I don't know. I think there might be better ways to handle it, depending on what you want to do. But if you want to run a wire from the board to the relay a long distance, then you can't use your normal mono plug. You have to use the tip and sleeve of the mono. You need a TRS, a tip, ring, and sleeve, because there's 3 wires here and not just 2 like the other headphone jacks. So you can take the black wire and solder it to the sleeve. You can take the center, and that'll be your 3 volt right here. And then the blue can be your signal on the tip. So you'll get this is basically a stereo 3.5. Normally this plug would be handling left and right audio in your ears, and the sleeve for the ground. Instead of left-right audio, we're actually sending a signal to the relay, 3.3 volts, and the ground. So the relay basically acts as an air gap between the high voltage and low voltage system. And I don't really have any video of this because I didn't really want to take on any kind of liability. This is just for information purposes on how this operates and how a relay works. So yeah, just be really careful when you're working with high voltage. You better know what you're doing before you deal with it. And this particular relay, you're not dealing with super high amperages or anything, but it is still dangerous. I think this is rated up to 15 amps, which just is your standard wall plug amperage, basically. Maybe it's only 10 amp, but even a 15 amp breaker, by the time it gets to the relay, it's at a reasonable amperage. So yeah, that's how I will be triggering my fog machine this year. Instead of running a TRS cable, a long distance, I actually have a second board that's doing nothing but running the relay. I actually pulled the wires from the fog machine into a separate little container box, put them into the relay, put this chip, soldered it all down, and put it into a box, a weatherproof box sitting right next to my fog machine. And I could also run other jacks for animatronics as well, but I just kind of want a dedicated one. I didn't want any more DC voltage stuff in that same box with wires for high voltage. It just wasn't for me. So I'd rather spend the extra, was it $7 on a second chip. So now that you got the board triggering your props via the phone or website using the buttons, let's really unlock the full potential of the get URL commands for the triggers. So the first software I'm going over is streamer.bot. This is a pretty common program that streamers use on Twitch. So won't go super deep into it because there's a lot of other great tutorials on how to use this. But basically what I'll do is, say I've created an action here called Jump Spider, and I want to choose what triggers it. So I have to come up to the tab called Commands, and I may have one called Jump Spider. It's labeled Jump Spider, and here's the command that it looks for in chat. Exclamation point jump. You don't have to have exclamation point. You can have a pound or add or whatever you want, however you want to handle it. If someone says either exclamation point jump or exclamation point spider, and the source that it looks through is Twitch chat or YouTube chat. And so I haven't decided if I'm going to stream on Twitch or YouTube, so it's looking at both. Hit OK. We'll go back to the actions, and when it receives the command, the jump or spider right here, when it reads that, it'll do these actions down here. So what I'm having it do is switch my active scene, so it switches to the camera. I have a camera set up near the spider, so people will be watching. It sets my active scene to the scare cam. It delays for 0.2 of a second. Then it does a fetch URL to the IP address http ://10.1.10.82. That is the IP address that I've set statically on my board to the little software, and /trigger D4. So that's written into the code that trigger D4 will trigger D4, and I've named it trigger D4. Then it delays for 12 seconds because that's just about the time it takes the prop to trigger, then reset, and then it goes back to the full view camera. And then I'll have my tombstone arm out here. Whenever someone hits, let's see, exclamation point tomb. You know what? I'm going to change that. Let's change that to the tombstone. Let's also make it exclamation point grab. Maybe someone won't remember tomb and I want the arm to grab. So exclamation point grab will also trigger it. Bam. Go back into my actions. It's right there. Tombstone. It looks for exclamation point tomb or grab. And then it'll change the camera. Short delay. It'll do the get URL function. HTTP : / the IP address of the unit / trigger D21. You know what? That might be wrong. I think it needs, I'm not sure if it's case sensitive or not. So I'll set that back to lowercase t. Yep. So this one will trigger what I have set up on D4, and this will trigger the one that I've plugged into D21. And that way chat can control the spider. So let's look at maybe another option. Maybe you want to do it directly from OBS. Not sure what you would do, other than maybe sitting in your house watching the stream with everyone else and hitting the button on your Stream Deck. So if you have your Stream Deck, this is an actual, like you're going to a website. So on the right hand side where it says system, you will drag over the website. Bam. Title, we'll call this Jump Spider. The URL, same URL, http : / for me is 10.1.10.82. For you, it might be 192.168.1.251 / what was my spider hooked up to? It was hooked up to D4, and I trigger D4. And this, instead of actually going to the website and pulling up a web page, we'll click this box. It is a GET request. So it's basically, it's sort of like you're trying to load that website, but when it sees anything try to load it, it knows to send a GET request or to trigger that pin that spider's on. And that's it. We got jump spider. We hit that button. It's going to trigger D4. Now, the way I knew it was D4, we'll dig through my code right here. And here's the command that you use. It was /trigger D4. If for some reason it was triggered, I would make sure that it's trigger ED. But yeah, you just make sure whatever this string is right here, that's what you type in after the IP address, and it'll send that request to pin D4. Trigger D4 will trigger pin D4. So it's incredibly powerful little device for such a small little chip to be able to run a web server like that, and all these little abilities. I'm probably also going to have a fog machine. Let me see with the web. Drag this over here. Maybe I want to trigger the web machine right from here. So I want to type fog. My fog machine was on HTTP // it was .81 10.1.10.81 / trigger. I was hooked up to the RX2 port. Let's look at this software. Trigger RX2 is on pin RX2. And instead of a short toggle pin, it does a long toggle pin to hold open that fog a little bit longer. Right here, long relay. Right, and that button would trigger my fog machine. I can be sitting inside, hit my Stream Deck button. If you can see my little Stream Deck here, I can hit that button. Or actually what I'll be using it on, I'll show you. I'll be using it on my iPad. Let's open it up. Bam. Here it is, already on my iPad. I'll be carrying this around with me outside. Oh no, what did it do? I don't care about that. I'll be carrying this around with me outside. Remind me later. Jeez. I'll be carrying this around with me outside on Halloween night, and I will be triggering these events along with people watching my stream hitting the button. Hopefully they won't be hitting it constantly, but you know how it goes when you're people trying to troll you. So yeah, it was incredible, especially if you're able to use an iPad. The iPad software, I believe, is free. Well, if you already own a Stream Deck, you can either pay for the iPad software or get it free. And if it's free, you only get a few amount of buttons, but you're probably only going to be using 1 or 2 buttons anyway. So the free version should be fine for you after you've made the investment into a Stream Deck and using the Stream Deck software. Okay, so let's get a little nerdy with this and really dig into this code and see what it's doing. All right, so the very beginning here, these are the libraries that are included. This the web server library and how to handle Wi-Fi. And then there's where you input your username and password. Then where you define your IP addresses. And I've gone over this before already, but I'm going over it again. This is where, right here, you will change the names of your buttons. You can safely change these. It's called a string. When I say a string, that's an actual text. So the text string right here, you can change what the button says safely. And let's see, I've created a variable here that's the delay time relay. And you can change this to whatever, if you only want the RX and TX, like the fog machine, to only activate for 1 second, you can change this to 1,000 milliseconds. And it'll change it for both RX and TX. Then next, we'll define what the pins mean. So the GPIO pin is on the right side here, and then what I went ahead and defined what the pin means onto the board, because the board, what was printed on the actual development board, is different number than the pin. So I've told it like the RX and TX, what does that mean? So I had to tell the program that if where pin RX2 is actually GPIO 16, and the pin TX2 is actually GPIO 17. These aren't things that you're going to want to change, but that is just what this means right here. Then we go and we start the web server. This is an array of naming the buttons. I have skipped 19 because 19 was pulled out to be the step pad bypass. Then we start the setup section of the code. It sets the baud rate. This is how it handles, right here is how it handles Wi-Fi. Then we'll go on to define the default settings of each of the GPIO pins on the board. So, or this isn't the default, this is if they're inputs or outputs. So D4 is output, all these are outputs except for D19. That is an input, and it's where you would plug up a step pad to pass through and trigger D21. Touch capacitance disabled. Some of the pins on this board are touch capacitance, where it was a little aggravating because if you just touch the wires, it can feel your hand there and it'll trigger. So I had to turn off the touch capacitance. I only want a hard trigger from the step pad triggering things, and that's what the pull up is. It disables the touch capacitance. You may want touch capacitance on some of your triggers here. More code to handle the Wi-Fi. And here, this is what determines what command triggers each pin. So I've set this for the word trigger D18 triggers pin D18. Trigger D21 triggers pin D21. And so on and so forth. Now we get to where we set the default power states of each of the pins. It kind of works either high or low for the animatronics, but I have it set to low, and whenever it receives the command trigger D33, then it'll set to high for, what was it, half a second, and then switches back to low again, and triggers like as if you had stepped on a step pad. Now D19 is different because it is a step pad pass through, and I had to set it default to high, and when you step on a step pad, it will go to low and then back to high again. Here is the HTML. This is the actual header and button sizes of the actual website that you go to. When you type in the IP address to go to the software. So for some reason you want to change a color, or you want to change what it says at the top, instead of multi-prop rib controller, you want to put the name of your haunt or something, you can put it right there. Then we begin the server itself with this code. And here's where I create the function called toggle pin. This is what it actually does whenever it receives a web server request, the trigger D4. It writes high to the pin when it was default to low, writes high, delays half a second, turns the pin back to low, delays for another half a second just because, I'm not sure why. And then there's a GPIO pin toggle. That's for debugging purposes if you're able to see text from this. And then this is the long pin trigger. The long pin trigger is what I have set to trigger a relay. You can see the difference here. It sets the pin to high, just like the other one. But the delay time, instead of 500, like a hard-coded 500 here, it references delay time relay back up top. So it references this value, references this value right here. So whatever value you have typed into here, and that's how long it will trigger the relay. Then it goes back to low power state again, and yada yada. Now, setup's done. We get to the loop part of the code. This is the special pin 19, which is this step pad pass through. It's always checking to see if it's low or if it's high. But if it's low, if someone's stepped on a step pad, it's always checking and it says, oh, it's low now because it made contact with a step pad. It triggers high and then back to low again, and it triggers pin 21. And here we just do some more definitions of what it means. It pulls 0 to 13. Since there's 14 buttons, you got to start at 0 and go to 13, and defines the array of buttons from D4 all the way to D33. Same thing here. Yep, all that looks good. Okay, let's go over how to make some drastic changes to the code if you'd like to. The way I program half of this is using ChatGPT. The way we do that is, let's just go ahead and take all this code, go ahead and get it on our copy, get it on our paste board, ready to go. So let's go to ChatGPT. This is a chatbot, an AI chatbot. So maybe I want to make a change to the code. Maybe let's say, I want to say on an ESP32, which is the chip that I'm using, on Arduino IDE, which is the programming interface I'm using here. How do I, let me see, what's a good thing? Let's try, how do I change GPIO pin? Maybe let's change pin 33. What do we want pin 33 to do? Let's say maybe let's that whenever someone, maybe let's turn it to maybe like a second step pad pass through. So GPIO pin, how do I change GPIO to GPIO pin 33 to trigger GPIO pin 32 when a signal is received on, I spelled that wrong, but it's smart enough, pin 33 on the following code. And then I'll paste the whole code, hit send. Oop. All right, it'll start generating it down here. Let me scroll down. All right, to change the GPIO pin 33 to 32 when the signal is received on pin 33, you will need to make the following modifications. So now it won't be completely correct, but it'll get you pretty darn close. And here it's telling me in my trigger command, we'll need to change this. And we'll need to change this. And here's the code for it right here. And with these changes, when you trigger pin 33, it'll also trigger pin 32. Adjust the delay or behavior as needed based on your requirements. Please note that you should also make your physical wiring match. Make sure your physical wiring matches this configuration. Pin 33 should be connected to pin 32 to achieve the triggering behavior. And you go, oh, well, I don't really want a wire. You go, I don't want a wire connecting pin 33 to pin 32. If you want to trigger pin 32 when the signal is received without a physical wire connecting between them, you can achieve this by a software approach here. Yep, it tells me to change the pin state to low instead of high, or let's see, yeah, and it's giving me the pretty darn accurate code. So if you want to make some changes to the code, maybe there's something that I'm not even thinking about that you want to do with this. You can just go to ChatGPT, and with a little bit of knowledge of how the code works in C++, you can generally, because sometimes they might get the actual word wrong. Maybe it'll say toggle. It'll say toggle instead of toggle pin. You know, oh well, let me fix that. It's supposed to be toggle pin. You know, so yeah, man, ChatGPT is an incredible tool for the basics of programming. Maybe you want to take this chip and take it in a whole other direction. Maybe you want the board to just control one actual animatronic itself. You don't care if it triggers it. Maybe you have a bunch of relays, or you have a bunch of things like, well, it's going to move this arm. It's going to delay for so many seconds to move this arm and then trigger this. You can have ChatGPT walk you through the setup of how to program it. When I started, I didn't know these I didn't know the program. I knew the basics of C++. I didn't know what all this was. I didn't know what toggle pin, int pin, async website. I still don't know. Doesn't matter. I knew what questions to ask of ChatGPT, and then it was able to give me what I needed. And that's really a lot. The same idea as being a good Google search person. If you know what to ask, you can generally get the information that you need. And I had to have some coding friends to help me out. Like, what question do I ask? What phrase? What am I missing? What phrase do I use? And people would tell me. They also helped me with some of the code too, for sure. But yeah, ChatGPT is an incredible tool. If you just want to play around with it and see what you can create on your own with this chipset, go for it. I had a lot of fun doing it. There was some frustrating moments for sure, but that's coding. So there you have it. Have fun with it. Feel free to ask questions. I'll be keeping an eye on the comments, and maybe check out my live stream and ask questions there at Man with Hats on Twitch. Happy Halloween.